She handed me a mirror, pointed to my scars, and told me I was too ugly to be in her wedding photos. She asked me to hide in the shadows of the third row so I wouldn't ruin her aesthetic. She didn't know I was holding the match that would burn her perfect lie to the ground. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I smiled and agreed. If you believe that karma always arrives on time, hit that subscribe button. The smell of sawdust has always been my preferred perfume. It is not merely a scent, it is an atmosphere of patience. It smells like time arrested and repurposed. When you walk into my shop on the edge of town, the air is thick with the suspended particles of oak, walnut, and cherry. It smells like honest work. In carpentry, as in structural engineering, there is a fundamental truth. You cannot lie to the material. A piece of quarter-sawn white oak has a grain that tells a history of droughts, storms, and sunlight. If the wood is rotten at the heart, no amount of high-gloss varnish or expensive veneer will hide the weakness. If you build a frame on a compromised foundation, physics will eventually collect its debt. Gravity is a patient creditor. It is a simple rule, one I have lived by for 40 years. My name is Arthur. My shop is a sanctuary of dust and humming machinery. The floor is permanently coated in shavings that curl like dried parchment. My hands are rough tools themselves, covered in calluses as thick as cured leather, stained with the oils of 1,000 different trees. These are hands that have built cribs for newborns, dining tables for Thanksgiving feasts, and the structural frames for houses designed to weather the fiercest storms. People respect my hands. They look at them and see competence. But they do not stare at my hands. They stare at my face. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with a rag, and looked into the small, dusty mirror hanging by the shop door. It is a ritual I hate, yet I perform it daily. The left side of my face is a landscape of twisted, shiny scar tissue. It looks like melted wax that hardened too quickly. My left ear is gone, a casualty of extreme heat, replaced by a beige hearing aid that hums with static, a poor substitute for the clarity of natural sound. I try to hide it with my hair, which is graying and thinning, but the device is a plastic reminder of what is missing. My left eye droops significantly, the eyelid pulled down by the tightness of the grafted skin, creating a permanent, sorrowful squint. When I smile, the muscles on the left side refuse to cooperate. Only the right side of my face joins in. The other half remains a frozen mask of a terrible night, a rigid topography of trauma. I touched the scar. It felt smooth, synthetic, like plastic. It did not feel like skin. It did not feel like me. Sometimes, in the quiet of the shop, I forget the monster exists. I am just Arthur. I am just the man who knows how to dovetail a joint so tight it holds water. Then I walk into a grocery store, and I see the flinch. I see the fear in a stranger's eyes, the primal recoil from deformity. I am a walking reminder that the human body is flammable. 25 years ago, my life had a different architecture. I had a beautiful wife named Elena, whose laugh could fill a room, and a 3-year-old daughter named Vanessa. We lived in a drafty Victorian fixer-upper that I was slowly bringing back to life. Room by room, I was restoring the soul of that house. But old houses hide secrets in their walls, old wiring. Dried timber. One night, a faulty space heater in the hallway shorted out. The spark was small, but the house was a tinderbox of dry lath and plaster. The fire moved faster than a terrified breath. I woke up to the smell of melting plastic, acrid and chemical, and the sound of Elena screaming. It wasn't a scream of fear, it was a scream of agony. I didn't think. Instinct is faster than logic. I ran. The heat was a physical wall, a solid mass punching me in the chest. I got Elena to the window, but the fire had already ravaged the structural integrity of the hallway. The floor was spongy. Vanessa was trapped in her crib across the hall. The ceiling was groaning, a sound I know too well. It is the sound of wood reaching its failure point, the fibers shearing under immense load. I dove back in. The smoke was a blinding, choking gray wool. I found Vanessa by sound, by her terrified whimpering. I wrapped her in a wet wool blanket and shielded her small body, with my own as the roof gave way. A burning support beam, heavy with old iron nails and history, collapsed onto us. It struck the left side of my face and shoulder with the force of a sledgehammer. I didn't feel the pain then. Adrenaline is a powerful anesthetic. I only felt the weight of my daughter in my arms, the precious cargo I had to deliver to the snow outside. I carried her out into the freezing night, Her skin as perfect and unblemished as a porcelain doll. She was untouched. Elena didn't make it. The smoke took her before the firefighters could cut through the door. The house, the dream, the wife, all turned to ash in an hour. I survived, but the fire took its fee. It took my face. It took my confidence. I raised Vanessa alone. I poured my grief into my work, sanding away the rough edges of my sorrow until only the hard grain remained. I poured my love into her. I wanted her to have everything Elena would have wanted. I worked double shifts. I took on jobs my body was too old for. I saw the way other kids looked at me at the playground. I saw the teachers try to avert their gaze during parent-teacher conferences. But for a long time, Vanessa didn't seem to mind. She would run to me, her little arms wide, and kiss my scarred cheek without flinching. "My brave daddy," she would say, her small hands tracing the ridges of the burn. I lived on those words. They were the morphine for my soul. I built my entire self-worth around that single phrase. I thought the foundation was solid. I didn't see the rot setting in. Time is a cruel sculptor. It changes things slowly, chipping away at the foundation until you don't recognize the structure anymore. As Vanessa grew, the gap between us widened. It wasn't a sudden break. It was a stress fracture that grew with every season. It started with small things. In middle school, she stopped letting me come to career day. "You're too busy, Dad," she lied, her eyes focusing on her shoes. In high school, she asked me to drop her off a block away from the movie theater, claiming the traffic was easier. She stopped inviting friends over. "The house is too dusty, Dad," she would say, avoiding my eyes. "It smells like sawdust. It gets in my clothes." By the time she was 25, Vanessa had transformed. She was stunningly beautiful, with Elena's dark, intelligent eyes, but she possessed a sharp, ambitious edge that Elena never had. She worked in public relations for a high-end fashion firm in the city. She curated her life like a museum exhibit. She spoke differently now. Her voice was polished, her vowels rounded and clipped, shedding the flat, honest accent of our working-class neighborhood. She spoke of optics and branding. I spoke of tensile strength and load distribution. We were speaking different languages. Then she met Julian. Julian was a good man. He came from the Montgomery family, old money, real estate, philanthropy, the kind of money that whispers rather than shouts. He was soft-spoken and kind, with hands that had never held a hammer but knew how to hold a pen. When Vanessa brought him to the workshop to meet me, the air was thick with tension. I could see Vanessa stiffen in the background, nervously picking at the fabric of her expensive camel hair coat. She was terrified. She was afraid I would say the wrong thing. She was afraid I would be too loud, too rough. She was afraid I would stain her perfect picture, but Julian didn't flinch. He looked me straight in the eye, the good one and the drooping one, and shook my hand, grease and all. "It's an honor to meet you, sir," Julian had said, his grip firm but respectful. "Vanessa speaks of you, often." I looked at my daughter. Her smile was tight. Her eyes were darting around the shop, judging the dust, the noise, the clutter. She was holding her breath. She was waiting for the beam to fall. She didn't realize that she was the one holding the match. The engagement came 6 months later. A diamond ring the size of a hazelnut. A party at the Montgomery estate that looked like a scene from a period drama. The house was a masterpiece. Neoclassical architecture. Columns, marble, symmetry. It was beautiful, cold, and imposing. I stood in the corner of the ballroom, holding a crystal flute of champagne. I was afraid to drink, terrified I might drop it. I watched my daughter sparkle in a sea of tuxedos and silk gowns. She moved through the crowd like she was born to it, laughing at the right moments, touching arms, tilting her head. She looked happy. She looked like she belonged there. And I, in my off-the-rack polyester suit that smelled faintly of mothballs, with my scarred, melted face, looked like a stain on a white tablecloth. I was a structural defect in a perfect room. That's when Elias found me. Elias was my oldest friend. He owned the lumber yard where I bought my wood. He was a man made of gristle, sawdust, and bad coffee. He was wearing a suit that looked 30 years old, tight across the shoulders. "She looks beautiful, Arthur," Elias said, handing me a napkin for my sweating glass. His voice was gravel rolling in a cement mixer. She does, I said. My voice felt small in the cavernous room. She owes you a lot. Elias grunted. He took a sip of his drink and grimaced. Top shelf stuff. Tastes like perfume. Give me a beer any day. She owes me nothing, I said automatically. She's my daughter. Fathers build the house. Children live in it. Elias turned to look at me. His eyes were sharp under his bushy brows. He had pulled me out of the depression after the fire. He had sat with me in the dark when I wanted to put a drill through my temple. He knew the cost of my survival. He knew exactly how much load the beam could take before snapping. Just make sure she remembers that, Elias whispered, leaning in close. Money changes people, Artie. It gets into the grain like rot. It makes them forget where the wood came from. It makes them forget the root. I didn't know why he said it then. It felt harsh, but the warning stuck in my chest like a splinter under a fingernail, small, throbbing, and impossible to ignore. If you are listening to this, sitting in your car or your living room, and you have ever given everything to someone, poured your concrete, laid your rebar, sweated blood into the foundation only to have them lock the door against you, then you know why I'm recording this. I am sitting in my shop. It is 3 a.m, the heating unit is off, and the cold is settling into the bones of the building. Subscribe if you want to know the truth, because what I am about to tell you is how a father's love, when pushed past its yield point, turns into a judge's gavel. The wedding planning was not a celebration. It was a military operation. Vanessa was the general, and her weapon of choice was money, specifically mine. We met for lunch at a place near her office called Verde. It was one of those modern establishments that feel more like a laboratory than a kitchen. Everything was glass, polished steel, and white marble. The air was aggressively air-conditioned, smelling of nothing. No garlic, no roasted meat, just a sterile, cold cleanliness. I sat at a small, wobbly table. An uneven leg, likely a missing glide. I had the urge to fix it, waiting for her. I tucked my rough hands under the table. I was wearing my good flannel, but in here it looked like a costume. Vanessa arrived 5 minutes late, a whirlwind of perfume and stress. But she didn't hug me. She sat down, checked her watch, and placed her phone on the table face up. Dad, we have 45 minutes, she said, signaling a waiter without looking at him. I have a briefing at 2. We ordered. She got a bowl of kale and quinoa that cost $22. I ordered water. How are you, Nessie? I asked, trying to find the daughter beneath the layers of foundation and contouring powder. Don't call me Nessie, she snapped, her eyes darting to the nearby tables. It sounds rural, and I'm fine. Stress. The Montgomerys are covering the venue and the catering, which is huge. Richard is being very generous. She paused, taking a microscopic bite of a kale leaf. But, she continued, tradition says the bride's family pays for the flowers, the dress, the photographer, the band, and the invitations. I've run the numbers. She slid a piece of paper across the cold marble. It was a spreadsheet. It comes to $42,000. I choked on my water. The number hung in the air, heavy and absolute. $40,000. That was the savings account. That was 20 years of putting aside $5 here, $50 there. That was the new truck fund. That was the maybe I don't have to lift heavy beams when I'm 70 fund. It was my safety net. That's a lot of money, Vanessa, I said gently. I could feel my heart rate climbing. That's everything I have in the bank. She put her fork down. The clatter against the bowl was sharp. I know it is, Dad, and I appreciate it. But this isn't a backyard barbecue. This is the social event of the season. Julian's father is inviting 2 senators and the mayor. The photographer alone is $10,000. He's been published in Vogue. $10,000 for pictures, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It's an investment, she said, her voice taking on that polished PR tone. These photos are branding. They establish us as a couple. Do you want me to look cheap, Dad? Do you want Julian's family to think we're less than? I looked at her expensive coat, the cut of which probably cost more than my table saw. I looked at my reflection in the window, the scar tissue shining under the harsh halogen lights. I never want you to look cheap, I said. The words tasted like ash. I want you to be proud. Then I need the check, she said. By Friday. The florist is threatening to release our date. I looked at the spreadsheet again. I mentally dismantled my retirement. I saw the fishing trip I would never take. I saw the new heater for the shop I wouldn't buy. I'll write it, I said. She didn't say thank you. She didn't reach across the table to squeeze my hand. She simply nodded, pulled out her iPad, and made a check mark. Good, that's settled. Now we need to talk about the logistics. Logistics? The ceremony, she said. Her demeanor changed. The frantic energy vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stillness. She leaned in. I've been looking at the lighting design for the cathedral. It's very bright, high-definition video, 4K resolution. Okay? I shifted in my chair. The wobbly leg tapped against the floor. Tap, tap, tap. Dad, I'm going to be honest with you, she said. Because I love you and I want this day to be perfect for both of us. The phrase, because I love you, is often the preamble to a devastating blow. It is the anesthetic before the amputation. Go on, I said. My stomach tightened. I don't want you to walk me down the aisle. The noise of the restaurant, the clinking silverware, the low hum of conversation, the hiss of the espresso machine, seemed to vanish. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. All I could hear was the rushing of blood in my good ear, a high-pitched whine, like a saw blade, hitting a nail. You? What? Please don't make a scene, she whispered, looking around nervously. Think about it, Dad. The photos, the video, these images will be in Town and Country. They will be on the Montgomery Company website. They are part of the brand. I'm your father, I said, my voice trembling. My hands were shaking under the table. I raised you. I saved you from the fire. I know, she hissed, her eyes narrowing. And I'm grateful. But look at you, Dad. Really look at yourself. She did something then that I will never forget. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, compact mirror. She opened it and held it up to my face. I was forced to look. I saw the twisted ridges of purple skin, the drooping eye that watered constantly, the missing ear, the hairline that retreated from the scars. You're intense, she said, her voice clinical. You're scary to people who don't know you. You'll ruin the aesthetic, the symmetry. People won't be looking at my dress. They'll be staring at your burn. They'll be whispering about the Phantom of the Opera Father. It distracts from me. I pushed the mirror away. My hand was shaking so hard I nearly knocked over the water glass. So, I'm an aesthetic problem, I asked. I'm a code violation in your perfect building. You're a distraction, she said cold-heartedly. I want Richard to walk me. Julian's dad. He's tall. He's distinguished. He wears a suit well. He looks the part that symbolizes the union of the families perfectly. It looks seamless. Seamless. That was the word. She wanted a life without seams, without scars, without history. She wanted to join two pieces of wood so perfectly that you couldn't tell they were ever separate. But to do that, you have to plane away the rough edges. I was the rough edge. Does Julian know? I asked. Julian thinks it's your idea, she said quickly, taking a sip of her sparkling water. I told him your leg was bothering you from the accident, and that you didn't think you could make the long walk down the aisle without limping. I told him you asked Richard to step in because you were shocked. She lied to him. She didn't just erase me, she rewrote my history. She turned my courage into infirmity. She turned my sacrifice into shame. I looked at my daughter. I searched her face for a trace of the little girl who used to sit on my workbench and watch me sand wood for hours. I searched for the girl who called me brave daddy. She was gone. In her place was a stranger with ice in her veins and ambition in her heart. I could have fought her. I could have yelled. I could have told her that my money came with conditions. I could have flipped the marble table, but I was tired. I was so incredibly tired. The weight of carrying the memory of the fire, the weight of raising her alone, the weight of 40 years of sawdust and labor, it all crushed down on me at once. Okay, I said. The word was a surrender. It was the sound of a beam snapping. Really? She looked relieved, her face brightening into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a terrifyingly practiced smile. If that's what you want, I'll sit in the pews. Actually, she said, checking her phone again. Could you sit in the third row? The first 2 rows are for the wedding party and immediate family, and with the camera angles, we need a clear line of sight. The third row, I repeated. Fine. You're the best, Dad. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand for a brief second. Her skin was soft, manicured, lotion soft. My hand felt like sandpaper against silk. Oh, and I need that check by Friday. Don't forget. She stood up, gathered her coat, and checked her reflection in the window. I have to run. Love you. I watched her walk away, her heels clicking on the pavement. A sharp staccato rhythm. Click, click, click. I sat there for a long time. The waiter came by and asked if I wanted to order food. No, I said. Just the check. I walked back to my truck. It was an old Ford, rusted around the wheel wells, smelling of oil and sawdust. It was real. It was honest. I sat in the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I felt the old ache in my shoulder where the burning beam had hit me 25 years ago. It throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I silently agreed to her terms, but something inside me, some vital beam of structural support that had held up my love for her for 2 decades, finally gave way. It didn't explode. It didn't burn. It just collapsed, dust to dust. I started the engine. I had a check to write. And after that? Well, after that I didn't know what I was. A father? A bank? Or just debris to be swept aside. 2 weeks before the wedding, I was a ghost haunting a rich man's future. I was working a job in the city, a complete gut renovation of a luxury loft in the meatpacking district. The client was a friend of the Montgomery family, though they didn't know me as Arthur, Vanessa's father. To them, I was just the carpenter, a pair of hands, a vendor. It was 8:45. The other trades, the electricians, the plumbers, the drywallers, had packed up hours ago. The site was silent, save for the hum of the city filtering through the massive, floor-to-ceiling industrial windows. The space was vast and hollow, smelling of wet plaster, cut lumber, and the metallic tang of copper piping. Shadows stretched long across the unfinished oak floors I had spent the last 3 days laying. I was up on a 12-foot ladder in the master bedroom, installing crown molding. It was delicate work. Coping the corners requires patience. You have to cut away the wood at an angle so it slides perfectly over the adjacent piece, creating a joint that appears seamless. I was working late because I needed the overtime. I had mailed the check for $42,000 that morning. My bank account was now a hollow shell. I needed this job to pay the electric bill at the shop. I heard the front door, 50 feet away down the main corridor, click open. I froze. The heavy latch echoed in the empty space. My first thought was security, or perhaps the owner checking progress. Then I heard the voices. They drifted down the hallway, amplified by the bare walls. I recognized the pitch immediately. It was a voice I had known since it first cried in a delivery room, 28 years ago. It was Vanessa. I should have called out, "I'm in here, just finishing up." But instinct stopped me. The tone of her voice was wrong. It wasn't the polished, public relations voice. It was low, conspiratorial, and laced with a cruel sort of mirth. Then I heard the other voice. It wasn't Julian. Julian's voice was a cello, deep, resonant, calming. This voice was a jagged saw blade. It was higher, rougher, with a mocking cadence I had heard only once before at the engagement party. "Are you sure the place is empty?" the man asked. "Positive," Vanessa replied. "The contractor said they wrap by 5. I have the key code from Julian. He thinks I'm checking on the paint samples for the nursery." I stood perfectly still on the ladder. I was in the shadows of the ceiling, hidden by a stack of drywall sheets leaning against the frame. My hand gripped a handle of my hammer so hard my knuckles turned the color of bone. They walked into the living room, which connected to the master bedroom through a wide, doorless archway. I peered through the gap between the molding and the wall. It was Marcus, Julian's younger brother. He was the black sheep of the Montgomery clan. I had heard the whispers. A gambler, a drinker, a man cut off from the family fortune years ago for indiscretions that were hushed up with heavy checks. He wore a leather jacket that cost more than my truck, but he wore it sloppily. He looked like a man who was rotting from the inside out. He walked to the temporary bar the owner had set up on a sawhorse table, expensive scotch left out for the workers, perhaps, or for late-night visits. Marcus didn't ask. He just poured. Marcus asked, taking a swig straight from the bottle before pouring into a plastic cup. Did the old man cough up the cash? I stopped breathing. The air in the loft felt suddenly thin, as if the oxygen had been sucked out. Vanessa kicked off her heels. She walked around the room, trailing her hand along the walls I had sanded. She looked relaxed. Predatory. He's handled, Vanessa scoffed. She laughed, a sound sharp as a tack. He handed over the 40 grand, like a good little puppy. He looked so pathetic, Marcus, sitting there in his flannel shirt, looking at his bank balance like it was a death sentence. And the aisle? Marcus asked, leaning against the window, silhouetted by the city lights. He's not walking me, she said. I told him he was too ugly. The words hit me harder than the burning beam had. Too ugly. I told him he scares people, she continued, pouring herself a drink. I pulled out a mirror and made him look at himself. God, it was brutal, but it had to be done. I can't have that landscape ruining the wide shots. Marcus threw his head back and laughed. That's cold, V, even for you. The guy saved your life, didn't he? That's the story, she said, waving her hand dismissively. He saved me. He got burned. Blah, blah, blah. He's been milking that tragedy for 20 years. My brave daddy, it's exhausting. I'm done paying for his heroism with my social standing. I felt a physical sickness rising in my throat. The nausea was overwhelming. She wasn't just ashamed. She despised me. She viewed my sacrifice as a debt she was tired of servicing. So, Marcus said, his voice dropping lower. He walked over to her. He didn't stand like a future brother-in-law. He stood like a lover. He placed a hand on her waist. Once I'm in, Vanessa said, leaning into his touch. Once I'm officially Mrs. Montgomery, I get access to the joint accounts. Julian is so trusting. He doesn't look at statements. We can start funneling the cash for your business venture to pay off your bookie. Sal is getting impatient, Marcus muttered. He breaks legs. V. I know. Just hold him off for 2 months. And the baby? Marcus asked. He looked at her stomach. The hammer in my hand felt incredibly heavy, a weapon of blunt force. Vanessa placed a hand on her belly, a gesture that should have been maternal, holy, but her face was twisted in a smirk. Julian is over the moon, she said. He thinks it's an heir. He thinks we conceived the night of the gala. He's already looking at private schools. She paused, tracing the rim of her plastic cup. He doesn't know I was with you that weekend in Cabo. The silence that followed was deafening. The traffic outside seemed to stop. The world tilted on its axis. Cabo. The weekend she told me she was at a wellness retreat. If he finds out, Marcus started. He won't, Vanessa said, with terrifying confidence. He sees what he wants to see. He's in love with the idea of me, the poor, self-made girl, the orphan rising from the ashes. Orphan? Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. Your dad's alive. He's literally in the 3rd row. I told his parents my dad is mentally unstable, Vanessa said. That the fire cooked his brain along with his face. That's why he's sitting in the back. They pity him. They pity me for having to deal with him. It's the perfect cover. If he acts out, if he says anything, they'll just attribute it to his PTSD. She reached up and kissed Marcus. It wasn't a quick peck. It was deep, hungry, and possessive. 2 years, she whispered against his lips. I stay married for 2 years to satisfy the prenup clauses about infidelity, which I'll manufacture against him, and then I divorce him. I take half, plus child support for a kid that isn't even his. And then we disappear. I wasn't listening to a daughter anymore. I was listening to a parasite. She was planning to hollow Julian out, just as she had hollowed me out. She was a termite in the foundation of a good man's life. You're a wicked woman, Vanessa, Marcus grinned, pulling away. I'm a survivor, she said. Just like my dad. They finished their drink. They laughed once more. A sound that echoed in the empty loft like demons in a cathedral. And then they left. The heavy door clicked shut. I stayed on the ladder for an hour. My muscles had locked up. My hands were shaking so violently that I finally dropped the hammer. It fell 12 feet. It hit the new oak floor with a loud ringing clang that sounded like a bell tolling for the dead. It left a dent in the wood, a permanent scar. I didn't care. My daughter wasn't just ashamed of my face. She was a monster. She was pregnant with her fiancé's brother's child, planning to defraud a good family, and using my life savings to fund the deception. She had turned my love into a weapon and used it to bludgeon me into silence. I climbed down the ladder. I packed my tools slowly, methodically. Every latch on my toolbox clicked like a gunshot. I drove home in silence. No radio, no thoughts. Just the white lines of the highway passing under my wheels. I walked into my workshop. It was midnight. The smell of sawdust usually calmed me. It smelled like potential. Tonight, it smelled like lies. It smelled like rot. I walked to my workbench. There, under the warm glow of my drafting lamp, sat a framed photo. It was Vanessa, at 5 years old. She was sitting on this very bench, holding a wooden bird I had carved for her. She was smiling. Her eyes were full of trust. Brave Daddy. I picked up the photo. The glass was cool to the touch. I looked at it one last time. I tried to find the girl in the picture. I tried to summon the love I had felt for 25 years. But all I could see was the woman in the loft, the woman who called me ugly, the woman who was stealing a future that didn't belong to her. I walked over to the table saw. I flicked the switch. The motor roared to life. The blade spun, a blur of silver teeth, screaming for wood to cut. I didn't hesitate. I slid the frame toward the blade.
Screech.
The blade bit into the wood frame, then the glass, then the photo. It shattered. The image of the smiling girl was torn apart, shredded into confetti and dust. I turned off the saw. The room fell silent, save for the blade spinning down. Whirr! Whirr! I looked at the debris. I wasn't going to let her do this. I wasn't going to let her destroy Julian's life. I had saved her from the fire once. Now I had to save someone else from the fire she had become. But I couldn't just tell Julian. He was love blind. He wouldn't believe the unstable, ugly father over his beautiful fiancée. I needed proof. I needed undeniable, structural proof. I wasn't a carpenter anymore. I was an investigator, and I was going to dismantle her life with the same precision I used to build it. The morning after the loft, I didn't go to the job site. I called in sick. It was the first time in 40 years I had missed a day of work for anything other than a funeral. I sat at my kitchen table, a piece of solid oak I'd built with hand tools before Vanessa was born. The house was quiet, but the silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the silence of a held breath. I wasn't a carpenter today. I was a demolition expert. And in demolition, you don't just swing a sledgehammer, you study the blueprints. You find the load-bearing walls. You find the weak points. You drill the holes for the dynamite. I needed help. I was a man of wood and nails, not shadows and secrets. I picked up the phone and called Joe. Joe was my old foreman, retired now. He was a man made of granite and gristle, a guy who knew the city's underground geography better than the city planners. He knew the mayors, and he knew the gutter rats. He operated in the gray areas where permits were optional and cash was king. Arthur, Joe's voice boomed, sounding like gravel tumbling down a chute. I haven't heard from you since the union picnic. You okay? You sound tight. I need a favor, Joe, I said. My voice was steady, stripped of emotion. I need to find a bookie, a specific one, someone who deals with high-stakes debt in the Upper East Side. The line went silent for a long moment. I could hear Joe lighting a cigarette, the flick hiss of the lighter. Arthur, you don't gamble, Joe said slowly. You don't even play the lottery. Why are you asking for this? I don't need to borrow money, I said. I need to buy information. Is this about the girl? Joe asked. He knew. Everyone in the old neighborhood knew Vanessa had drifted away, floating up into the stratosphere of wealth. It's about survival, I said. Can you set it up? Joe came through. He always did. 2 hours later, I walked into the Pocket, a pool hall in the shadows of the Queensboro Bridge. It was midday, but inside, it was eternal twilight. The air was thick with stale cigarette smoke, chalk dust, and the smell of desperate men. The rhythmic clack-clack of billiard balls was the only music. I met Sal in the back booth. Sal was a small, wiry man with eyes like a shark, flat, black, and unblinking. He wore a tracksuit that cost more than my weekly wage, but it looked cheap on him. He was peeling an orange with a knife that was far too large for fruit. "You the carpenter?" Sal asked, not looking up. "I am." "Joe says you're good people, says you're solid." Sal popped a slice of orange into his mouth. "He says you want to know about Marcus Montgomery." "I want to know the number," I said. I placed an envelope on the table. Inside was $500, cash I had taken from the petty cash tin at the shop. Sal looked at the envelope. He didn't touch it. He laughed. A dry, rasping sound. "Client privilege, my friend. Bad for business to talk." I looked up at the ceiling above his head. There was a dark, spreading stain on the acoustic tiles. A slow drip fell into a bucket in the corner. Plup, plup, plup. "I can fix that leak," I said. I saw the water stains on the flashing when I walked in. "Your roof is compromised. One bad storm, and this whole back room floods. The felt is rotted." Salcedo stopped chewing. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the bucket. "You're handy." "I'm the best," I said. "I fix the roof. You give me the ledger page." "And you keep the 500? Salt studied me. He saw the scars on my face. He saw the calluses on my hands. He saw a man who wasn't afraid of work, and more importantly, a man who wasn't wearing a wire. $500,000, Sal said softly. "The kid is into me for $500,000. Sports, cards, horses. He bets on raindrops running down a window pane. If he doesn't pay by next month, well, let's just say he won't be walking down any aisles. I need the paper, Sal. I need the proof." Sal reached into a leather satchel. He pulled out a photocopy of a ledger page. He slid it across the sticky table. "For the roof," he said. "Start tomorrow." I had the motive. Now I needed the smoking gun. The infidelity. I hired a private investigator named Miller. Miller was a quiet, beige man. He was the kind of guy you would forget 5 seconds after meeting him. He blended into brick walls. He owed me a favor for building a custom deck for his house in Jersey last summer. A job I had done at cost, because his wife was sick. "I need eyes on my daughter," I told him, sitting in his cluttered office that smelled of old coffee and cynicism. "And Marcus Montgomery." Miller didn't ask why. He looked at my face, then at the photo of Vanessa I gave him. He saw the pain in the set of my jaw. "I'll need 3 days," Miller said. 3 days of waiting. 3 days of sanding the same piece of wood in my shop until it was paper thin. 3 days of staring at the phone. On the 3rd day, Miller came to my shop. He didn't smile. He handed me a thick manila envelope. "You're not going to like this, Addery," he said softly. "It's thorough." I opened the envelope on my workbench. The photos spilled out like a deck of poisoned cards. Vanessa and Marcus arguing outside a private women's clinic. Vanessa and Marcus kissing in a park, hidden behind a line of trees. Vanessa crying, and Marcus holding her face, not in comfort, but in conspiracy. And then the digital drive. "Audio," Miller said. I got close with a directional mic in the park. I plugged the drive into my laptop. I put on my headphones. The sound of birds chirping, the sound of wind in the leaves, and then the voice of my daughter. "Vanessa, he suspects nothing. We just need to stick to the timeline." "Marcus, what if the baby comes early? He's not stupid, bae. He can do math." "Vanessa, I'll say it's premature. Doctors say whatever you pay them to say. I have the OBGYN lined up." My stomach turned. I felt a physical lurch, like falling from a scaffold. She had everything planned. Every lie was a brick in the wall. She was building around Julian. She was going to trap him in a marriage built on fraud, raise another man's child on his dime, and then loot the estate. I looked at the metadata on the photos. The timestamps aligned perfectly with the weekend of the retreat. I had the dynamite. I had one final stop. I needed to look the part. I went to the tuxedo rental shop where Vanessa had sent me. It was a strip mall place, smelling of dry cleaning chemicals and desperation. Mrs. Gable, the seamstress, was there. She had hemmed my work pants for 20 years. She was a kind woman with a mouth full of pins and a heart of gold. "Arthur," she said, looking at the order form on her computer screen. She frowned. "Are you sure about this order? It says—" "Well, it says Basic Package B." "It's what the bride ordered," I said. Miss Gable lowered her voice, leaning over the counter. "Arthur, honey." She ordered Italian Super 50s wool for the groomsmen. Custom fit. She spent $300 on their silk ties alone. This suit, this is 100% polyester. It's stiff. It doesn't breathe. It rents for $40. She looked at me with profound pity. She knew I was the father, and she knew I was being dressed like the help. She said I wouldn't know the difference, I said. Mrs. Gable touched my arm. Her eyes were wet. "You're a good father, Arthur. You don't deserve this indignity." "I know," I said. I felt the heat rising in my face. Not shame, but a cold, hard anger. "But I'm going to wear it." She brought out the suit. It was shiny, cheap. It crackled when I touched it. It was a clown suit. I took it. It was part of the costume now. The costume of the foolish, ugly, grateful father. The costume of the man who was supposed to sit in the third row and fade into the background. I drove home, with the plastic-wrapped suit hanging in the back window of my truck. It looked like a body bag. I went into my house. I laid out the items on my kitchen table. The ledger from Sal, the photos from Miller, the audio drive, the $40 suit. I looked at them. These were my tools now. The wedding was in 48 hours. I had constructed houses that had stood for a century. Now I was going to engineer a collapse that would happen in seconds. And I would be sitting in the front row to watch the dust settle. The rehearsal dinner was held 3 days before the wedding, at a private yacht club on the harbor. The room was a glass box floating over the black water, filled with people who wore their wealth like armor. I wasn't invited to speak. I wasn't even seated at the head table. I was placed at table 14 near the swinging doors of the kitchen, next to a cousin who didn't speak English and a teenage nephew who spent the entire night playing games on his phone. From my vantage point, I watched the pantomime. I saw Vanessa holding court in a cocktail dress that shimmered like liquid mercury. She was laughing, touching arms, playing the role of the blushing bride to perfection. Marcus was there, too, lurking at the bar, his eyes following her with a hungry, proprietary look that no one else seemed to notice. Richard Montgomery, Julian's father, drifted toward my table during the dessert course. He was a towering man with silver hair and a jawline that suggested generations of authority. "Arthur, isn't it?" he asked, looming over me. I stood up, wiping my mouth with a napkin that felt heavier than my shirt. "Yes, sir. Please, sit," he said, waving a hand. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Vanessa explained everything to us. About your condition." "My condition?" I asked. "The PTSD," Richard said gently. "The crowds, the noise. She told us how difficult this is for you, psychologically. It's incredibly brave of you to be here, Arthur. We want you to feel safe." She had built a cage of lies around me. She had turned my scars, the evidence of my courage, into a symptom of insanity. She had painted me as a broken, unstable man to ensure my silence. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said. My voice was calm, but under the table my fist was clenched so hard my fingernails were digging into my palm. "We are very happy to welcome Vanessa," Richard continued, oblivious to the tension. "She's a special girl, a diamond in the rough. Julian needs a strong woman to ground him." "She is certainly that," I said. "She knows exactly what she wants." He patted my shoulder, a heavy, condescending tap. He thought he was comforting a simpleton. He had no idea he was patting the detonator. The next day, the day before the wedding, I was in my shop. I was oiling my chisels. It is a calming task. Wipe on, wipe off, protecting the steel from rust. My phone buzzed on the workbench. It was Vanessa. "Dad," she said, skipping the greeting. "I have a crisis." "What's wrong?" "The bar package. Marcus insists on having the Blue Label scotch for the groomsmen toast. The venue wants another $5,000 for the upgrade. I don't have it, Vanessa, I said, staring at the oil rag in my hand. I gave you the savings. The account is empty. I have $80 until my next draw. Figure it out, she hissed. The mask slipped completely. Her voice was a serpent strike. You have assets. Sell some equipment. Sell that old truck. I can't look cheap, Dad. If Marcus doesn't get his scotch, he's going to be in a mood, and I can't handle him. She wanted me to sell my tools. She wanted me to pawn the very things I used to build a life for her, just to buy high-end liquor for the man she was sleeping with. The audacity was breathtaking. It was the final crack in the dam. You want me to sell my livelihood, I said slowly, so your fiancé's brother can drink $500 whiskey. You're useless, she spat. Just show up and shut up. That's all you have to do. Don't embarrass me. The line went dead. I looked at my tools. The Japanese saws. The hand planes, the chisels. They were my friends. They never judged me. They never lied. They only did what they were designed to do. I picked up my tablet. I loaded the photos from Miller. I loaded the audio files. I scanned the ledger from Sal. I wasn't just a carpenter anymore. I was an architect of ruin. And I was going to bring the house down. I tried. I really did. I couldn't let the beam fall without one final safety check. I drove to the cathedral later that afternoon, during the final setup. Space was cavernous, smelling of beeswax and incense. I found Julian near the altar, checking the sound system. He looked tired but radiant. He saw me and smiled, a genuine warm smile that broke my heart. Arthur, he said, coming down the steps, checking the sight lines. Julian, I looked into his eyes. They were kind eyes, naive eyes. Are you sure about everything? About the timing? He laughed softly. Nervous, Dad? Don't worry. I love her. I know you're worried about handing her over, but I promise I'll take care of her. He put a hand on my arm. I know Vanessa said you get anxious, that you have episodes. But you're family now. We'll look out for you. He was walking off a cliff, and he was smiling at the view. He believed the lie so completely that he was pitying the only man who could save him. Julian, I said, my voice thick. Sometimes the wood looks perfect on the outside, but the heart is rotten. You have to look deeper. He looked confused. That's poetic, Arthur. But she's perfect. And she's carrying my child. What could be better? He patted my arm again and walked away to talk to the florist. He didn't hear the warning. The structure was condemned. Now it had to be demolished. The wedding day, the ceremony, was a spectacle. The cathedral was packed with 300 guests. Senators, CEOs, socialites. The air hummed with the sound of a string quartet playing Bach. I wore the polyester suit. It was stiff, hot, and scratched my neck. It felt like penance. I walked down the side aisle. I felt the eyes on me. Look away, they seemed to say. Don't stare at the monster. I heard the whispers. That's the father, tragedy, fire, unstable. I found the third row. I sat down. The wood of the pew was hard. The organ music swelled. The heavy oak doors swung open. I watched Richard Montgomery walk my daughter down the aisle. She looked ethereal, a vision in white silk and French lace. She walked with a grace that masked the rot inside. She smiled, that perfect, practiced smile, the one she used for magazines, the one she used to manipulate Julian. Richard looked proud, his chest puffed out, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch, completely unaware he was holding the hand of a viper who was planning to rob his son blind. Vanessa reached the altar. Julian took her hand. He looked at her as if she were a deity. The priest began the service. Words about truth, honor, and fidelity floated through the vast space. I, Vanessa, take you, Julian. Her voice was clear. It didn't waver, it didn't tremble with guilt. To be my husband. I promise to be faithful to you. Lies. I promise to love you for who you are. Lies. I watched Marcus. He was the best man, standing just behind Julian. He was swaying slightly, his face flushed. He caught Vanessa's eye. He winked. It was subtle, a twitch of the eyelid, but to me, watching from the shadows of the third row, it was a scream. It was a shared joke between thieves. We got him. My hand went to the inside pocket of my cheap jacket. I felt the cool metal of the tablet. I now pronounce you man and white. The organ blasted a triumphant chord that shook the floorboards. They kissed a performance for the cameras. The crowd erupted in applause. I didn't clap. I sat perfectly still, a statue of scarred flesh and polyester. They walked back down the aisle, passing right by me. Vanessa didn't look at me. She looked at the camera crane hovering above the pews. She looked at the future she had stolen. I watched them leave the church. The guests filed out, chattering about the dress, the music, the beauty of it all. I stood up slowly. My bad leg ached. Beautiful ceremony, wasn't it? A woman in a large hat asked me as she squeezed past. She didn't wait for an answer. She just wanted to get to the reception. The ceremony is over, I whispered to the empty air. But the work isn't done. I walked out into the sunlight. It was blindingly bright. The reception was next. The speeches, the toasts, the demolition. The reception was held at the Pierre. It was magnificent, a testament to what unlimited capital can achieve. Crystal chandeliers, the size of small cars, hung from the gold-leafed ceiling, casting a warm, flattering light on the 300 guests. Cascades of white orchids tumbled from every centerpiece. I sat at table 12. It was positioned strategically as far from the head table as possible, right next to the swinging doors of the banquet kitchen. Every time a waiter rushed out with a tray of filet mignon, the door bumped the back of my chair. Thud, thud, a waiter, rushing to refill a wine glass, clipped my shoulder with a pitcher. Ice water soaked into the shoulder of my cheap polyester suit. He didn't apologize. He just kept moving, his eyes fixed on the important guests. I didn't wipe it off. I sat there, wet and cold, watching the play unfold. I watched Vanessa. She was radiant, flushed with triumph. She was whispering to Marcus, who was seated on her left. I saw her hand brush his thigh under the table, a small, intimate gesture, a spark in a powder keg. I watched Julie. He looked at her with such pure, unadulterated adoration it was painful to witness. He was a man looking at a mirage, thinking it was water. The dinner cleared. The speeches began. Richard Montgomery stood up first. He spoke for 20 minutes about mergers and acquisitions and legacy. He spoke about Vanessa as if she were a blue-chip stock he had acquired at a bargain. Then the maid of honor spoke about shopping trips in Milan and how Vanessa was the sister she never had. Then Marcus stood up. He held the microphone like a rock star. He was swaying. His tie was loosened. The $5,000 Scotch upgrade I had refused to pay for had clearly been consumed. To my brother, Marcus slurred, grinning like a wolf. "You're a lucky man, Jules. You got the girl that we all wanted." A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the room. A few people exchanged glances. Julian laughed good-naturedly, assuming it was brotherly ribbing. I clenched my fist under the table. "To Vanessa," Marcus said, raising his glass high. The amber liquid caught the light. "May you always get exactly what you deserve." Oh, she would. She definitely would. The speeches ended. The band was warming up. This was my window. I signaled the DJ. He was a young kid, 22 maybe, whom I had tipped $100 earlier in the evening. I told him I had a special surprise video tribute for the bride from her father. He thought it was sweet. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ's voice boomed over the speakers. "We have one final surprise. A special toast from the father of the bride. Arthur?" The room went silent. Vanessa froze. She was holding a glass of champagne to her lips. She dropped it. Crash. The sound of shattering crystal was sharp and violent. Champagne foamed onto the parquet floor. She stared at me across the vast expanse of the ballroom. Her eyes were wide with panic. She shook her head violently. "No," she mouthed the words. "Sit down." I stood up. I buttoned my wet cheap jacket. I adjusted my tie. I walked to the stage. My limp was pronounced today. The damp weather and the stress made the old burn injuries ache deep in the bone. The sound of my heavy work boots on the wooden steps of the stage echoed. Clomp, clomp, clomp. I took the microphone. It felt heavy, like a hammer. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the mixture of pity, curiosity, and revulsion in their eyes as the stage lights hit my scarred face. I let them look. I let them see the monster. "Good evening," I said. My voice was gravel. It was the voice of a man who has inhaled smoke and sawdust for 40 years. "My name is Arthur. I'm Vanessa's father." I paused. I looked at Julian. He was smiling encouragingly, raising his glass to me. "Good man," his eyes said. "Be brave." "My daughter asked me not to walk her down the aisle today," I said. A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone coughed. "She told me." I continued, my voice rising slightly, cutting through the murmur, that my face was too ugly for the photos. Gasps. Loud, shocked intakes of breath. "She said my scars. The scars I received pulling her out of a burning building when she was 3 years old would ruin the aesthetic of her perfect day." Richard Montgomery stood up at the head table. His face darkened to a shade of plum. "Vanessa, is that true?" "He's confused," Vanessa shrieked. She jumped up, knocking over her chair. "He's having an episode. Dad, sit down. Security. Get him off the stage." 2 large men in black suits started to move from the back of the room. "I am not confused," I said into the mic. My voice was calm, authoritative. "I am clearer than I have been in 20 years. I pointed a scarred finger at the security guards. "Stay back." There was something in my tone, the command of a foreman on a collapsing site, that made them hesitate. "I agreed to her request because I loved her," I said. "I gave her my life savings, $42,000, because I wanted her to be happy. I was willing to be invisible." I reached into my jacket. I pulled out the tablet. I connected it to the HDMI cable the DJ had left ready for me on the podium. "But then," I said, looking at Julian, "I found out that my sacrifice wasn't enough. I found out that this wedding isn't a celebration of love. It's a bank robbery." "Cut the mic," Marcus yelled. He rushed toward the stage, his face twisted in fury. "Sit down, Marcus," I roared. The sound system peaked, screeching with feedback. "Sit down or I will tell everyone about the Atlantic City incident." "I know about the hotel room, Marcus." He froze mid-stride. His face went pale, draining of blood. He sat down on the edge of the stage, defeated. I tapped the screen. The massive projection screen behind the band, intended for a montage of baby photos, flared to life. "This," I said, pointing to the screen, "is Marcus's ledger." The spreadsheet from Sal appeared. It was massive. Red numbers against a white background. He owes $500,000 to a loan shark named Sal in Queens. He needs money fast, or he loses his legs. The crowd murmured. Richard Montgomery put on his glasses, squinting at the screen. "And how does he plan to pay it?" I asked. "With Julian's money." I pressed play on the audio file. Vanessa's voice, amplified by the concert-grade speakers, boomed through the ballroom. It was crystal clear. "Vanessa. He suspects nothing. He believes anything I tell him. I told him my dad is mentally unstable. I can't have him ruining the pictures." The ballroom was deadly silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Julian turned to look at Vanessa. His face was the color of ash. The audio continued. "Marcus. And the baby?" "Vanessa. Julian is over the moon. He thinks we conceived the night of the gala. He doesn't know I was with you that weekend in Cabo." The reaction was visceral. A collective scream of horror from the crowd. A woman at table 4 fainted. Julian stood up slowly. He looked like he had been shot in the gut. "Kobo," Julian whispered. His voice broke. "Julian, baby, no, it's a deep fake." Vanessa screamed, grabbing his arm. Her nails dug into his tuxedo jacket. "It's AI. My dad hates me. He's jealous. He's trying to ruin us." "The baby," Julian said, staring at her stomach. "Is it mine? Of course it's yours. How can you listen to him? Look at him. He's a freak." I clicked the next slide. It was the photo from Miller. Vanessa and Marcus kissing in a park. Her hand was on her stomach. The date stamp was neon green in the corner. "And this," I said, "is the timeline. You told Julian you were 6 weeks along. But the medical records from the clinic you visited, which I found in your trash, say 10 weeks. I looked straight at Julian. 10 weeks ago, Julian, you were in London on business. But Marcus was in Cabo with you, Vanessa. The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable as a steel beam. Julian looked at the screen. He looked at his brother, who was now staring at the floor. He looked at the woman he had married an hour ago. He took a step back from her. He looked at the gold band on his finger. He didn't throw it. He removed it, slowly, painfully. He placed it gently on the table next to the centerpiece. I want an annulment, Julian said. His voice was quiet, but in the silence of the room, it carried like a gunshot. Immediately, Julian, please, Vanessa screamed. She fell to her knees, ruining the silk dress she had prized so highly. Think of the press. Think of the brand. I'm thinking of the family, Richard Montgomery boomed. He stood up, knocking over his chair. He looked at Marcus. Get out, both of you. You are no son of mine. He looked at Vanessa with pure, unadulterated disgust. And you are a fraud. Marcus ran. He didn't even look at Vanessa. He bolted for the side door like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. Vanessa was left alone on the floor. She was surrounded by the wreckage of her perfect day. Her mascara was running in black streaks down her face. She looked up at me on the stage. Her eyes were filled with hate. I hate you, she shrieked. You ugly, jealous monster. You ruined my life. I looked at her. I touched the scar on my cheek. It didn't ruin your life, Vanessa, I said into the microphone. I saved Julian's. I placed the microphone on the stand. Clunk. Enjoy the cake, I said. I paid for it. I walked off the stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. No one looked away from my face now. They didn't look with pity. They looked with awe, with respect. I walked past the frozen waiters, past the security guards who stepped aside to let me pass. I walked out of the ballroom, leaving the chaos behind. I walked through the gilded lobby and out into the cool, dark night of the city.
I expected to feel sad. I expected to feel the crushing weight of losing my only child, and I did feel a pang of grief. I grieved for the little girl who used to hold my hand. I grieved for the memory of Elena, but that girl had died a long time ago. She was consumed by the fire of greed. Mostly, I felt light. I felt the way a structure feels when the load is finally removed. I walked to my truck. I unlocked the door and climbed in. The smell of sawdust and added coffee greeted me. It was the smell of truth. A knock on the window startled me. It was Julian. He was standing there in his tuxedo, tie undone, hair wild. He looked like a man who had just survived a car crash. I rolled down the window. "Arthur?" he said. He was crying. "I'm sorry, Julian," I said. "I truly am. No man deserves to hear that." "Don't be," he said. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "You saved me. I was blind." He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a check. "My father, he wanted you to have this. It's the 42,000. And a little more for the consulting fee," he called it. I looked at the check. It was for $100,000. "I don't want his money," I said. "I didn't do it for the money." "Take it," Julian said, pushing it into my hand. "Please, consider it a refund on a defective product." He smiled, a sad, broken smile. "You know, she told me you were crazy. But you're the only sane person in that room. You're the only one who told the truth." "You're a good man, Julian," I said. "You'll find someone who deserves you, someone who loves the foundation, not just the paint." "Maybe," he said. "But next time, I'm going to ask to see the father's face first. If he has scars, I'll know he's real." He tapped the roof of my truck. "Drive safe, Arthur." He turned and walked away into the night, a lonely figure, under the streetlights. I drove away from the hotel, away from the luxury, away from the lies. I drove back to my small, drafty house on the edge of town. I didn't go into the kitchen. I walked straight into the workshop. I turned on the lights. The dust motes danced in the air. I picked up a piece of cherry wood from the scrap pile. It had a deep, dark knot in the center. A flaw, a structural defect, that went straight through the heart of the wood.
Most carpenters would throw it away. They would call it ugly. They would say it couldn't hold a load. I ran my thumb over the knot. I felt the roughness. I felt the history of the tree. I put it on the lathe. I turned the machine on. The wood began to spin. Whirr! I picked up my gouge. I would make a bowl out of it. I would carve around the knot. I wouldn't hide it. I would make it the center of the design. I would sand it until it was smooth as glass, until the flaw became the most beautiful, strongest part of the piece. I worked through the night. The shavings piled up around my feet like snow. As the sun came up, shining through the dusty windows onto my scarred face, I realized something. I wasn't just Arthur the ugly carpenter anymore. I was Arthur, the father who had walked through fire twice. The first time, I carried my daughter out. The second time, I walked out alone. But I was free, and the foundation held. If you have sat with me through the long night, watching the dust settle, and the truth finally come to light, I thank you for your time. In a world full of veneer and cheap polish, honest stories are the only things that truly bear weight. If this story held strong for you, if you felt the rough grain and the solid truth of it, please leave a like. It tells me the foundation is sound. And if you want to return to the shop for more stories carved from the hard wood of real life, consider subscribing. The door is always open, the machinery is humming, and there is always more work to be done. Until next time, rears twice, cut once, and never hide your scars.